I really wanted to run a horror game, but because everyone around me is just so short on time, we can't really do the character creation stuff and play the game all in one night. So I just made my own system so we can get into the game quickly and have a night of fun, and I guess if you watch this video, you will learn how I did this, and maybe that'll inspire you to make your own system too. And by the way, this video isn't going to end with me saying, oh guys, and if you like that, there's a course that you can run in the description. It'll only cost you $100. TTRPGs come in all shapes and sizes, so you can quickly make a TTRPG system yourself by first defining the failure and success state. When do you win and when do you lose? Is it when the Jenga tower falls over? Is it when you fail a rock, paper, scissors? Is it just when you roll low? But that's not all. A TTRPG system isn't just when do you win and when do you lose, so you have to define when do you bring these things in, whether it be dice or cards or whatever it is. And in most circumstances, like nearly all the circumstances, it's when success and failure isn't certain. So I thought, okay, it's a horror game, it's a bit more tense, a bit more brutal, so I thought, what about a D10 and a D6? Roll them together and try and roll over the result of the D6 with the D10. But why did I do that? Was it just a random thought? Well, no, I thought, okay, if I'm going to have a horror game and it needs to be a bit more brutal, a D10 and a D6 trying to battle each other, that D10's going to have to work pretty hard to roll over a dice that its maximum result is only 4 numbers less than the maximum on the other one. And as an example to contrast this, I thought taking this design into a heroic fantasy setting would probably be something like a D20 rolled against a D8, because then you're actually more likely to succeed against a D8 when you're rolling a D20 as opposed to a D10 and a D6. But if you just leave it there, that's just 2 dice, 1 dice mechanic, and that's kind of it. That's not really a game. So I thought, how can I make these dice interact when it comes to certain circumstances? And those circumstances are the tried and true advantage and disadvantage, but I added another layer, hard and easy difficulty. Advantage and disadvantage changes the size of the D10 or the skill die. Meanwhile, the circumstance at hand, be it hard or easy, that means it would change the D6 from a D8 if it's harder, or a D4 if it's easier. That suddenly gives us 2 more dials to adjust. Is it a harder circumstance, like you're trying to lift up a car with your bare hands? Well, that'll be a harder circumstance. But is my character maybe unnaturally strong for some reason? Well, they get an advantage, therefore D12 trying against a D8. But I wanted things to have the opportunity to go very good and very bad, therefore crit fail and crit success. And in this circumstance, a crit fail is when both dice roll the same result, and a crit success is when the skill die rolls the maximum, because the other dice can't beat it. And there we have it. We have dice, mechanics, advantage, disadvantage, circumstances changing based on what the players do, all the fun stuff that we love to bring into our TTRPGs. But if you leave it there, that's just kind of a generic system again. You have to try and blend not just the mechanics into play, but also the mechanics and the intended feel of the game all together. You might not notice because a lot of the games we play tend to be cohesively designed, but game designers will try to make the game fit the mechanics and make the mechanics fit the intended style of game that they want to create. They have an intention going in, and then they make the mechanics. They don't just go, okay, I have a dice system, let's make a game out of it and charge for it. For example, one of the games that I'm making has an air of mystery and strangeness about it, and therefore I thought, dice doesn't really fit that to me. I think that cards have more of an air of mystery. The result is a game with 4 stats, and you have a number attached to each stat, and you have to try and draw from the mysterious deck to get a number that is lower than the stat on the sheet. And about that cohesive design that I mentioned, the reason that there's 4 stats and not like 6 or 8 like other games is because there are 4 suits for the cards. This allowed me to give the players the opportunity to attach a meaning onto their stats, like their strength or dexterity. They get to come up with a reason as to why they have this memory linked with this stat because of the suits. You'd have to read it to understand why. And also, when you draw a card from the deck and it's like a 3 and you have a stat of a 6, that means you've drawn lower than the 6, but if the suit is the same on the card as it is with your stat, that means it's a crit success. And if it's a fail and it's the same suit, it's a crit fail. I don't know, when I thought of that, I was like, oh my god, I'm a genius. What I'm getting at is that dice have numbers, cards have numbers, and suits, but you have to consider what you're actually using and think, does this match the game that I want to make? But since I wanted to make a game that was simple and everyone could play, I chose dice because I know all my friends already have dice. If you're wondering why I have such a big smile on my face throughout all this, it's because I just love design. I think that you should really have a go at trying to design your own thing, because it's super fun. I think of design all the time. I think of it when I'm having a shower. It's probably why I get so distracted. And really, the basis as for why people get so design-brained and they get into these sort of things is because they just have strong opinions about these things. But even with all this talk of dice, mechanics, advantage, disadvantage, all this stuff that seems quite cohesive and easy to understand and use, even then, that's just a box of dice. That could be any game, really. Take any skin, any coat of paint, apply it. That could be any game. So, I had to, and I implore that you do so, if you want to do this, is to create narrative concepts that integrate with the mechanics that I've mentioned so far. Make sure that you always try to blend these things together. So I thought, okay, horror. It's not all about just being chased to a haunted house. It's giving people the idea that they can get out, but give them the grim realization that things are not going to be easy as they once thought, even with this big axe or gun in their hand. So, there's combat, and it uses the same D10, D6 thing, except depending on the size or the potency of the weapon, it will use a D8 or a D4. Think of it like a D4 would be a dagger, a D8 would be a massive hammer, and a D6 would be a good little short sword or something in the middle. So if there's combat, some narrative ideas to put into this would be, okay, I've got a D6 and a D10, very small dice. Small dice, small numbers. What if I made a non-Newtonian monster that actually can resist higher damage rolls, but it has to be chipped away with smaller and smaller rolls? What if I made a more bestial and primal monster? So to react to that primal pun, if you roll a 3 or a 5, it hears you because 3 and 5 are prime numbers. And before you say it, yes, 7 is a prime number, but I'm thinking more along the lines of the D6. And since it's a horror game, let's add a fear mechanic where, like the other kinds of rolls, you have to try and succeed a roll to not freak out. And depending on what you see, whether it's a dead dog or a demon, that will change what dice you have to try and roll over. But if you succeed, then that's fine, you don't freak out. But you get a building fear. As the difficulty dice, the D4, D6 or D8, it will get a +1 for every time you succeed, making the failure and freak out almost inevitable. But after all this, we need something for the players to have, so let's cover character creation. And let's try and stick with the D6, D10 mechanic that we have so far, and I think I have a good use for it. If you want to determine your character's age, roll the 2 dice, and the D6 is the 10s that go up from 10, 20, 30, etc. And the 10s is the individual year in between. So I roll the D6, get a 2, I roll the D10, get a 3, I'm 23. It's something so small, but I've personally never seen that being done before, so I think it fits our design well, and it's pretty unique. Even something tiny and simple like that can elevate your game beyond just a simple dice mechanic, like how extremely rules-like games like Everyone is John has just a single dice roll. But the characters don't have anything to be different with. They don't have any stats per se, or ways to differentiate them. So I considered how the stats would work. Would you even have stats like strength, dexterity, intelligence, or whatever it is, if it's just a single D10 or a D6? Like, the D10 and the D6, them rolling against each other is the difficulty of the roll. You've already got the difficulty with the D6, so what do we do there? Is it a case of you have a bonus based on things like strength? You have a +1 if you're lifting a heavy car or something like that? Or is it categorical, like, oh, you have advantage when you do something to do with engineering specifically, or survival specifically? Maybe you just choose a trait and a flaw, like maybe you're good at mechanical engineering, but you're also an asshole. Click the video on screen to see some more of those strong opinions I mentioned before as I delve into the design of D&D, and more specifically, the dragons in D&D. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.